The second the door closes, something in the body exhales. Not dramatically. Not like a movie scene where someone finds themselves under soft lighting and suddenly understands their childhood. More like the nervous system finally stops holding a tray full of invisible drinks. No faces to read, no tone shifts to decode, no tiny social invoices arriving every 7 seconds. That is decompression. And somehow, society looked at that very normal homeostasis and went, suspicious, maybe you're broken. Beautiful work, culture. A person says, I just want to stay home. And suddenly everyone acts like they confess to living in a cave with a raccoon accountant. But for some people, home is not hiding. Home is where their bandwidth stops bleeding out through every open window. The real conflict is not between social life and laziness. It is between what the body knows and what the world keeps demanding. Because the world still sells outside as proof of wellness. Go out, be seen, say yes, attend the thing. Pretend the restaurant isn't loud enough to sandpaper your soul. And when someone doesn't want that, the socio-cultural conditioning machine starts coughing smoke. They must be antisocial, they must be depressed, they must be wasting their life. Or, wild possibility, their system has a lower stimulation threshold. Subject alpha is the person who comes home from a perfectly normal social event looking like they just survived a board meeting inside a blender. Nothing bad happened, nobody insulted them, nobody threw soup, but their brain spent 3 hours tracking volume, facial expressions, timing, jokes, exits, smells, chairs, lighting, group dynamics. And whether that one person's yeah meant yeah, or secretly meant I now hate you forever. That is not casual processing, that is a full sensory audit. And when your bandwidth works like that, home is not a preference, it is defragmentation. The body needs low stimulus space the way a phone needs to stop running 37 apps before it catches fire in your hand. This is where sensory processing sensitivity makes the picture less insulting. Some nervous systems process input deeply. They do not just experience a room, they absorb the room, chew it, file it, compare it to every other room, and then wonder why they need 4 business days of silence. So when they cancel plans and sit in familiar lighting with the same mug and the same blanket and the same tiny domestic rituals, that is not failure.
That is repair.
The social world keeps acting like energy should refill while you are still spending it. Ridiculous little circus. For these people, staying home is the shutdown sequence that moves energy away from performance and back into structural repair. No more outward rendering. No more smiling with a dying battery. No more pretending the group chat invitation is a sacred moral summons. Just quiet. Just homeostasis crawling back into the room. And the body, for once, not being asked to explain itself. For most of human history, being alone was not exactly marketed as a wellness retreat. Isolation meant danger. No tribe, no protection, no extra eyes watching the dark. So the nervous system learned, quite reasonably, to treat forced separation like a threat signal. That old wiring is still in the basement, banging pipes. But here is the part people keep flattening into nonsense. Forced isolation and chosen withdrawal are not the same animal. One is exile, the other is sovereignty. One says, nobody wants me. The other says, I am done renting my nervous system to every room with bad lighting and louder opinions than necessary. Evolutionary psychology explains the ancient fear. Self-determination explains the modern relief. Because when a person chooses home, chooses quiet, chooses a low-stimulus environment where nothing is performing at them, the body often stops bracing. Thoughts settle. Feelings organize. Tiny internal fragments begin walking back toward each other like they finally got the correct address. That is integration. Not glamorous, not Instagrammable. No neon sign saying healing journey over a bowl of soup. Just the private, almost boring miracle of becoming less scattered. But society sees someone choosing home and immediately misreads the whole scene. It calls peace avoidance. It calls regulation sadness. It calls autonomy isolation. And now the person has to spend even more energy proving that rest is not a crime. Absurd.
This is the dissonant loop.
The world demands presence as evidence of health, then drains the exact people whose health depends on controlled absence. So they go out to avoid guilt, then they come home wrecked. Then they feel guilty for being wrecked. Then they agree to another thing because guilt has apparently become everyone's unpaid event planner. At some point, the math becomes stupid. Autonomous spatial selection is not punishment. It is the body choosing a room where it can finally hear itself think. And here is where the real damage starts. Not from staying home. From pretending you are fine in places that quietly peel your nervous system like a cheap sticker. You say yes when your body already said absolutely not. You put on the normal person at a gathering costume. You laugh at the correct volume. You stand in the kitchen holding a drink you do not want, listening to someone explain a story that has somehow developed 14 unnecessary side quests. And your inner world slowly starts desynchronizing, tiny fracture by tiny fracture. Because every time you override your real stimulation threshold, you teach the body that its signals are merely decorative. Cute little suggestions, background noise, nothing serious. Then one day, you are exhausted and vaguely angry and weirdly numb. Not because your life is empty, but because you keep outsourcing your identity to environments built for someone else's nervous system. That is cognitive dissonance with shoes on. The self says, I need quiet. The performance says, don't be weird. So you become fluent in betraying yourself politely. Very elegant, very socially acceptable, very expensive. And when the performance finally stops, when the door closes and nobody needs your face anymore, energy starts flowing back toward the abandoned rooms inside you. The neglected thoughts, the delayed emotions, the values you could not hear over everyone else's plans. That is not laziness. That is integration, waking up after being shoved into a closet. Staying home in that moment is not shrinking. It is the end of environmental adaptation fatigue. The body stops leaking, the self starts returning. And the whole system quietly says, oh, there you are.
There is a kind of independence that only appears when the outside world stops interrupting your internal weather.
At home, the mind can evaluate things before they get painted over by social pressure. Do I actually want this? Do I actually like these people? Do I actually enjoy this activity? Or did I just inherit it from the giant public religion of you should get out more? That pause matters. Because without it, a person can confuse momentum for desire. They can spend years attending places their nervous system files under mild hostage situation simply because everyone else calls it fun. Home interrupts the spell. It gives the mind back its sovereign architecture. Not in a dramatic, crown-on-head way, more like finally being able to sort laundry without someone throwing more laundry through the window. Values separate from expectations. Desire separates from obligation. Peace separates from avoidance. And yes, that last one matters. Because not every I want to stay home is regulation. Sometimes it is fear wearing sweatpants. Sometimes it is avoidance pretending to be self-care while quietly making the world smaller. That distinction is important. But shame is a terrible diagnostic tool. It just points at everything and screams. A restorative home preference leaves the system more available, more coherent, more alive afterward. Maladaptive avoidance usually leaves the system smaller, tighter, and more afraid of re-entry. The point is not to worship isolation like it is a personality brand. The point is to stop treating controlled absence as moral failure. Because sometimes the most psychologically honest thing a person can do is step out of the noise long enough to find out what is actually theirs. Modern life is basically one long attention economy flea market. Everyone is waving something, a notification, a plan, a group invite, a hot take, a crisis. A tiny rectangle screaming, look at me or your relevance will expire. So when a person wants home, quiet, sameness, familiar objects, predictable lighting, and the sacred silence of not being perceived,
Maybe that is not a defect. Maybe that is psycho-cybernetics doing its job.
a living system trying to regulate itself against a world that keeps pressing buttons for profit. Sovereign withdrawal is not antisocial by default. It is a counter-normative regulatory protocol. Meaning the person is not necessarily rejecting people. They may be rejecting overload, rejecting performance, rejecting the weird cultural belief that a full calendar is the same thing as a full life. Because it is not. Sometimes a full calendar is just a haunted house with reminders. And the home-preferring person can feel that immediately. They can feel the cost before the event even starts. The outfit decision, the travel, the parking, the small talk, the temperature of the room. The moment someone says, "We should all go somewhere after this," and their soul quietly climbs out a bathroom window. This is not because they hate humanity. Humanity is fine in controlled doses.
Preferably with exits, preferably without fluorescent lighting.
Preferably
Make a
not stack it on
wish.
top of 3 other commitments
We
and a
are
loud
so
birthday
glad you
dinner
are
where the
here
table is too
celebrating
long
with
for any
us.
conversation to function like a normal human exchange. Their system is screening for stimulation debt, and when the debt is too high, home becomes the only sane accounting department. That is the whole verdict. Staying home can be avoidance, yes. But it can also be decompression, defragmentation, bandwidth recovery, environmental control, emotional integration, and plain biological homeostasis. The body is not always being dramatic, sometimes it is being accurate. So the guilt can sit down, the shame can stop auditioning for authority, and the world can survive one less person pretending to enjoy being overstimulated for social optics. If this hit a little too precisely, commit to the pattern, not the guilt, not the performance, the pattern. Because the next time someone calls you boring for wanting to stay home, you may finally understand what they are really seeing. A nervous system that stopped asking permission to recover. Subscribe if you want the next breakdown.